Hello, Earthlings and aliens. It's me, it's Tanza. I just finished giving my talk at Strut. I gave a talk called The Art of Seeing Clearly, which showed in conjunction with my solo show. I just finished it. I think it went really well, and I'm very proud of the presentation that I made. So I'm sharing it here on YouTube. Thank you to everybody who has supported me throughout this process. Thank you to Strut and the SF AIDS Foundation for hosting my show and for everybody who came. And I'm just really excited to talk about art, talk about this show, and pull in a little bit about this philosophy of art viewership that I've put together over the past few years. So I hope that you enjoy the talk and let me know what you think. And without further ado, here it is. The Art of Seeing Clearly. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Apologies for the wait. It was a lot this morning, but I'm so grateful that everybody is here. Welcome to Strut. This is the health clinic run by the SF AIDS Foundation. They've been here since the early aughts, and since they opened every month, they have hosted artists in this space. So my exhibition is downstairs. I'm one of the monthly artists that's shown here. They also have other group shows, that sort of thing in the space. And this clinic, Baruch is probably going to be better at explaining, is a sexual health clinic. So if you need birth control, STI testing, gender-affirming care, all of those things are provided by this clinic. And it's a community-focused space. And so one of the things that Strut has mentioned is that arts are part of health. So if we have a holistic view of the arts, then if we have a holistic view of health, then that will include having the arts in this. And this is incredibly relevant to my presentation. So Bob, can we change the slide? Can you be over here so I can make eye contact with you?
I cannot reach the computer.
There's a remote.
I'll show you where the remote is in just a moment.
Great. Hi. We're just getting started. Thank you for coming. Great. Okay. So what I wanted to do was present to everybody a little bit about the journey that this exhibition took. It's the culmination of about 2 years of work. And through this process, I learned a lot about myself, my artistic process, and also about basically like a philosophy of art has emerged from this exhibition that I want to share to everybody. So to start out, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Tanza, and I've always been an artist. So when I was growing up, my parents handed me a marker for the first time when I was 2 years old, and this is immediately what I did with it. And my family was a Filipino-American military family, and what that meant was that we moved around a lot. I don't really have a hometown. I have places that we settled briefly that became home, but there's always been some part of me that's been jealous of people who grew up in one place, have a hometown, a childhood home. And my family, we didn't have any of those things, but what I did have was a talent, right? And a way of processing the world that provided me with mountains of evidence. I have piles and piles of paper, all representing things that I've looked at, imagined, cared about. And when I was really looking deeply at what brought me into the arts and why I kept doing it, what kept coming up was this sense that everything was compulsive, like I really needed to be doing this. And I think that this practice emerged because I needed it. It was a way of proving that I existed. So if we can move forward. The thing is, up until recently, my work has not been in painting. Since high school, throughout college, and the period of years after that, I really focused my attention on comics. And in my mind, this was about finding ways to share my story using the conversation that narration and imagery can present. I relied heavily on my own family's history, and I was really using it as a way of processing the ways that, like, what it was like going in the world as somebody like myself. But a lot of this required me to articulate the ways that I was different from other people. So this was a lot of, like focusing on my identity and what it was like being, gay, transgender, Filipino, child of immigrants, etc. And in 2020, all that attention on the identity started to feel bad, right? There was a lot of things going on around. I'm sure everybody can remember what that was like. And I found that I wasn't able to write anymore. Like, I couldn't put a complete narrative to my story, and I needed to find something else to do. And so basically, as the world changed, so did my artistic practice. And something happened in 2022 that really set the stage for this project. It's something that changed my life. I listened to a podcast. So in September of 2022, Bjork released her podcast, sponsored by Mailchimp, thank you, called Sonic Symbolism. It's a fantastic project, and what she talks about in the podcast is her creative process. So really going through each individual album, talking about how her life was at that point, what she was focused on, the creative process. She talks to these people who she's been collaborating with for decades to talk about her music. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the way that she talked about her album covers. So she says that essentially she's using the album covers to describe the sound. And she incorporates all of these different elements that you can read like a tarot card. And so she uses the color palette, texture, her posture, the expression that her face is holding, and she refers to this as sonic symbolism, essentially using visual symbols to explain the sound. And what I took from that was that the senses are all connected to each other. So when you hear a sound, it'll evoke a feeling. That feeling might have a color. That the theme of the lyrics might have, use texture or sensation. Like, we are interconnecting all of these different modes of feeling that help produce this overall emotional effect. So, and one of the things that she did for every album was, at the very beginning of each episode, she lists a bunch of words that essentially like evoke the album, the creative vision of the album. So for example, for her album Biophilia, which is how she pronounces it, the words that she brought up were equilibrium, synchronizing opposites, electric blue, copper, pedagogic, cosmic, atom, element table, non-human scale, galaxies, not narrative, pacifist, nature/technology solutions. So when you have this image, you have the list of words, you get a little bit about her process and like what sound she was using and why. Suddenly the album became so much richer, right? Like, I don't know about you all, but for a long time I wrote Bjork off as like a bit much, which is funny considering our relationship now. I thought of her as like EDM for Faye, right? But that completely changed when I learned about her creative process. And one of the things that I'm very grateful to her music and to this podcast for is the process that it brought into my own creative practice. So essentially what I started doing when I was going through, the world at this point was I was just asking really open questions about what was going on. I would basically essentially do a body scan and try to figure out what this feeling was. A lot of, this like post-lockdown world has been conflicting, cognitive dissonance, a lot of things going on at the same time, and like trying to parse through it, I needed to ask bigger questions and start explaining them through metaphor and symbolism, like shifting out of a set narrative of this thing that happened, this thing happened, and it made me feel like this, to a more physiological, sensory, like free association kind of space. So I started asking myself questions like, what are my mental asymptotes, right? Like if I'm spiraling, what is the center of gravity for it? And then what emerges in the body when I don't address it, when I do address it. And so essentially for every painting that I put together, I would start with this list of words. The words would be things that have been popping up in my periphery. I started this sketch, for example, in October of last year. So these were words that were coming up, like echo chambers, like learned helplessness, right? I started bringing in imagery and colors that I associate with that. I try to locate where that feeling creates tension in my body. And then gradually over time, I start developing that imagery. I do a little bit of research. Sometimes I'll find ways that other traditions around the world have explored these kinds of feelings. I like looking into the chakras specifically because they bring in colors, right? All of the chakras are related to a color. And I just keep digging at that imagery. I look at the posture that evokes that. And I try to get as deep and intense with it as I can. And gradually over time, I get into a space where the composition starts to unfold. And at this point, I have a general idea of what the painting is going to be, but I don't have a set plan. I'm taking this kind of iterative process and I'm exploring where it goes. And so when I get to the painting, I'm starting with the sketch as a starting point. I go into the process, and the first session that I have with a painting, I put on my Bjork album, and I try to get as much of it down as possible. I get the entire skeleton of the image down from what I got from the sketch. But then from that point forward, it's like a process of, let's say, 4 to 12 weeks, just going back and forth with this image. I'll this particular painting, Savior Complex, is downstairs. I made it so that it can flip either way. It's reflective. And so for this painting, I was flipping it one way, and then the next stage, I was flipping it the other. If I decide some part of it just isn't working, I get rid of it. And then as I keep going, gradually the image and the composition will emerge. I'll come through all of these process, and every single session I have, I get closer to what I would call a representation of that inner state. And as you can see, the images will coalesce over time. I'm not planning this. This is me going in every single time, facing the image that I've made and seeing what it needs at that moment. And this whole time, I'm just thinking about what is the feeling that I'm trying to get through, and is it coming? Is it working? So I started to think of my paintings as a mirror. I'm facilitating an image coming from them, and I'm trying to understand a complex image by visualizing it. And what I find is that the canvas is really excellent at reflecting the level of complex emotion when I just let it work. And so what I'm doing now is I'm really thinking about calibrating that mirror as closely as possible. But the question that everybody asks me when I show up and show my work is, what is it? So I told you all that. I have all these things. The feelings are big. I show it to you. First question, so what is it? What's going on? And I find it often kind of hard to explain, partially because it's following this iterative process, and also partially because it's kind of intense. And so I started thinking about what is the point of showing this to people? What kind of conversations emerge? And what I realized was that my process was only half of the equation. So all of the things that I'm making are the context. I'm really building a story within the painting, but it's not the whole picture. The whole picture doesn't come together until we start to have the conversation within the work. And problematic fave, Pablo Picasso. When he was working on Guernica, which is the big painting about the Spanish Revolution, If you've seen, you probably have seen it. It's gray, it's big, it's got a horse on it. And one of the things that I noticed when reading an interview about how he was working on it was he had the same process. He would put in a character and then remove it, put in something else and remove it. He would move things around. And somebody interviewed him about that process, like, how can you do this without a plan? And essentially what he said was that a painting is not thought out and settled beforehand. While it's being done, it changes as one's thoughts changed. And when it's finished, it still goes on changing according to the state of mind of whoever's looking at it. A picture lives a life like a living creature, undergoing the changes imposed on us by our life from day to day. This is natural enough as the picture only lives through the person who is looking at it, essentially allowing the image itself to have a life that is outside of the, let's call it clutches of the artist. And I think that this is a very different way of thinking about painting and images than, I don't know, what I was taught in school, which is here's all these geniuses, here's the right answer to how you understand their work, and if you don't, you just don't know enough about it, right? This is really a more collaborative process, and I think that it speaks to what art can be for. One of the things that I really want to emphasize is that when I'm showing you my work and you ask me what it means, I am not the holder of the meaning. You are the holder of your own meaning. And I think that one of the problems in our education is that, you know, you look at a painting or you read a book in English class, and what ends up happening is you will be told, so this is what it's about. This is what the painting's about. If you didn't know that, then you didn't actually understand it. But it also allows institutions to decide what the right answer is. It allows institutions to say, this is what's important because it means something like this. And it feeds into this cult of personality. It introduces a lot of mistrust, and it honestly feeds directly into this idea that art is a commodity, right? If it's very specific to one person's idea, then it's, that's what creates the scarcity. So I've been thinking about what the purpose of art is, and ultimately what I think that I've come to focus on is it's not about what the art means to me, but it's what it means to us. And when we're creating meaning together and we're having these kinds of conversations, what we're doing is we're engaging in interdependent consciousness. So I'm gonna go into this a little bit more. There's a lot of science that's come out recently about the psychology of the arts and how we create meaning and what happens within us when we're looking at art. And one of the things that I have really been thinking about is how my emotional state when I'm making my painting can resonate with the emotional state of the person who's viewing it, even if they don't have all of the context. A lot of the time when I show somebody my work, my favorite compliment is, I feel that. I feel that. Somebody will look at my work and it'll be like, oh, it's embodied, right? And that's really what I'm going for. For me, the way that I'll frame this is that for me, the canvas is a mirror. For you, the painting is a window. And like any other window, it has a little bit of your reflection in it when you're looking through it. And I think this is important in this conversation about what art is for, because when I'm working on all this stuff, I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing here? Right? We've come in on this lovely Sunday. Thank you so much for being here. But is this the right thing for us to be doing right now? There's so much going on in the world, and I have this sense of course art is important. Of course we need it. But is it escapism, or is there something else to it? What purpose does it serve in our world right now? Does art have a place in our fight for liberation? What is that? And I think that this interdependent way of viewing art is an answer that I've come to grow very fond of. So when I think about this, I don't think that any particular piece of art is going to change the world. I think that that's a little naive. If a perfect documentary, movie, painting could shift all of humanity towards the better, it would have already. But I do think that art can change us. Art can change the way that we connect to other people. And when you look at it, you're reforming the way that you see the world. And with any luck, you're reforming the way you see the world in a way that will help. And so when I think about art being for us, I've read a couple of academic papers and some books about this new field of psychology that essentially is looking at the social psychology of the arts. Instead of thinking about things as having like a universal beauty, a universal meaning, great art hits us all the same way, instead it's looking at actually what is happening to us, how much of that is informed by who we are as people, and then what happens to us when we look at things together. And one of the things that I think is really beautiful is that art is able to communicate things that we often are unable to communicate explicitly. We can connect deeply on like the level of the human condition. We can challenge our preconceptions. We reconceptualize questions that we're grappling with. And we can confront ambiguous ideas without necessarily having to walk out with an end, right? A lot of conversations about like uncertainty, we want the certainty at the end of it, but that doesn't happen a lot of the time. And so when we engage with the arts, we're training the kind of attention that it is required for us to move through uncertain things. There's a lot of really interesting studies. This one I really like. It's by Ed Vessel, Art Reaches Within, Aesthetic Experience, the Self, and the Default Mode Network. And essentially what they did was they brought a bunch of people into the psych lab, and they presented them all with paintings that they were unfamiliar with. And instead of having people rate it based on like how good or beautiful it was, they rated the paintings based on how much they connected, how emotionally moving the painting was. Like, did it make you feel something? And what they found was that for most things over here, there's like not a ton of activity in this certain part of the brain called the default mode network, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for your internal dialogue, your daydreaming. When we listen to music, this part activates. When we're making moral decisions, thinking of autobiographical memories, essentially the center of the brain that is where we live, if we want to like place the I somewhere. And the thing about it is that only work that we connect with, only work that emotionally moves us, activates that area, but it does a lot. And what this shows us is that the arts are able to interact directly with the self. And in many ways, it's capable of helping shift the way we see the world. And the reason why it's doing that is because it's interacting directly with who we are. So your aesthetic sensibility is deeply personal. And your way of seeing the arts, what touches you, what doesn't, that is a way of understanding who you are, ultimately. And one of the things that's really exciting about this is that what we notice is that art, that we have that kind of connection with, feels like a close relationship. And so this study, one of the takeaways they got, I really like this one, is that art in any of its forms can feel strikingly personal, intense aesthetic experience, specifically aesthetic pleasure, things that you like, often carries with it a sense of intimacy or belonging or closeness with the artwork. That intense aesthetic experience can sometimes be bidirectional. Not only does the perceiver feel as if they understand the artwork, but there's a sense that the artwork understands the perceiver, expressing their own innermost thoughts, feelings, or values. And so in many ways, this explains the deep connections that we have with musicians that get us, songs that understand us, like paintings that we needed to see, like, I didn't understand this until I saw this. So that kind of connection that we're making is, if you remember, in that space where we are formed, like us as individual people. And so that kind of connection is, in many ways, like, unique to the arts, and therefore necessary, right? It's one of the reasons why it's necessary. I'm not going to go too much into this. This is a really heady lit review of brain studies that cover the whole mind and what's activated when we're having arts experiences. Essentially, the takeaway of this was that it is possible to map all of these studies of the brain, looking at like experiencing the arts, visual, auditory, otherwise. And you can map them onto this understanding of the social brain. So essentially all of the regions of the brain that are activated during the complex social interactions. So I'm not going to explain this. I just want you to look at it. And the thing that I really want to emphasize is look at how much of the brain is active when we're fully engaging with the arts. And this requires a certain amount of attention. You need to be present. But when you are present with the arts, what it's doing is it's engaging all your senses, and it's allowing sensory material to integrate into your psyche. And I think that that's really exciting. And the reason why we can study this, and one of the things that it shows us about art as a social psychological phenomenon, is that it has a lot of analogies to parsing complex social scenes. So when you're dealing with ambiguous things like, how does this person feel, like what's going on around me, we're making the same kinds of calculations when we look at a piece of art in a museum, right? We're pulling in the social context, we're pulling in the reactions of people around us. And in many ways, it's a way of training that system. And one of the exciting things it does is it takes this uncertainty, and the way that we're parsing it is very similar or the same as how we practice theory of mind, which is the ability that we gain over time, we don't have it as children, of understanding what another person is thinking and feeling. So when we're having these ambiguous feelings, we're looking at we're like, what does it mean? Part of our brain is saying, what does it mean for this other person? And it's engaging this like extraordinarily active set of skills, essentially, that we're using to parse this complex system. And so essentially what I'm proposing is that the arts, when we remove them from, the $100 million Basquiat that sold last week or whatever, and we instead focus on the role of arts in communities, we see how art functions in culture, as in like how it emerges from the way that people interact with each other. What I think we see is that the arts are a way for us to become interdependent. We feel more connected. We're encouraged to take on others' viewpoints. We have this embodied sensory sense of empathy. And that connection is ultimately what many of us crave in a world that's plagued by like the loneliness epidemic and social media and all of these forces that disconnect us. We need ways to connect, and the arts are one of the best ways to do that. And so I'm proposing essentially that we start to think of the arts not just as commodities, not just as here's an image that's gonna help me get numbers on Instagram, or I hope my painting sells for $1,000, but instead we look at the arts as a way of caring for our communities. So what it does is it provides us opportunities to confront uncertainty, take on different perspectives, pluralistic forms of truth, and ways to communicate about all of those concepts in ways that are neutral, thoughtful, and that will affect us in the long term. And in my mind, we need alternatives to self-care. I hear a lot of things about we need self-care. Self-care is more than just bath bombs. It's a form of resistance and all of those things. I'm like, that's amazing, sure, but I want practical. How do we do it? And going to an art show by somebody that you know is one of those ways that you can do it. And when we're engaging with work that deals with our emotions, uncertainty, we're addressing those things, we're finding ways to unnumb ourselves from what's happening in the world, but also to do that with other people, right? When we're going to a concert with an artist who's saying something that as a group we're like, yes, I also believe that. That is our way, we come together and we can really shift the kinds of conversations that we're having. So all that to say, thank you so much everybody for coming to my talk. Thank you for connecting with my work. A big thank you to Strut for hosting. Thank you to Baruch, who has put in the work to make all of this happen. Yes, thank you so much. I have a little QR code if you want to look at me on the internet. I've got information about this show. And we will go downstairs after this. One of the things that I have is I want to put together an exhibition catalog. It was not going to happen by today. And so what I've done is I've taken the proofs that have the sketches and the information about each painting. And so if you all wanted to like take one and like walk around the exhibit and engage a bit more directly with the work from my perspective, I'm gonna have those. You can't keep them, they're just proofs. But yeah, and hopefully we can talk about it. I'll also be selling some prints. I have my postcard sets. And that's it. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you. Thank you, Internet, for being here. Yay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all of you. Yes. So, hello again. Thank you so much if you've watched all the way to the end of this video for listening to my talk, The Art of Seeing Clearly. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I don't know how many people are keeping up with my YouTube like this, but you might have noticed that this one is a bit different. I'm in front of the camera. I am doing an entirely different kind of work than I was in 2020. I was one of those people who started a YouTube channel during lockdown, and I stopped because I found that I had a lot less to say than was required of me posting a video that frequently. But I'm feeling much better about my work and being in front of the camera. So this is a preview of what's to come. If you're interested in what the show that I'm talking about in this talk looks like, my next video is going to be a series of videos about putting together the show, preparing for it, working on all of the pieces that are in it, and all of that will be on my channel eventually. I'm not going to promise any specific timeline because I really have been moving towards this idea of like slow content. So just putting out things at my pace when I feel like I have something to say, and not trying to force it to happen more frequently because of the algorithm. Like, I'm just not as interested in that anymore. So if you're curious and want to stick on, subscribe to this channel. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Patreon, and I just recently have started a mailing list. So if you want to escape the clutches of social media and the algorithm, this is actually one of the best ways to keep up with me because there is no algorithm in your email. So, as far as I know. So do that if you're curious, and even if you're not, thank you. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a good day. And you're doing great. Bye. Bye, Instagram. Bye, love you. Bye. Okay. How do I close this? And now. Thanks, bye. I don't like social media.